Good afternoon. Our session today will be a little bit different than the others because the class having been completed, you now have the basic principles that are necessary to know in both living a spiritual life and practicing spiritual healing. You will find in this Manchester class that every principle necessary to develop a healing consciousness is on these tapes. That doesn't mean that anyone hearing those tapes can necessarily start healing immediately, nor does it mean that if you could memorize every word on the tapes that you could start teaching, because the infinite way differs from many teachings in this respect, that if you knew all of the books and all of the tapes and could recite them word for word, you would still not qualify to be either a healer or a teacher. In the infinite way, there is a step beyond the knowing of the truth, and yet you cannot eliminate that first step of knowing the truth. As a matter of fact, if that first step isn't taken, the chances are the remaining steps will never come. It is absolutely necessary to know the correct letter of truth. Let no one believe for a minute that you can do spiritual healing work without knowing the correct letter of truth. Of course, you can do a certain amount of faith healing if you have sufficient faith, and you can do a certain amount of mental healing even though you do not completely know the letter of truth. But when it comes to spiritual healing, you are dealing with a principle that never varies, that must be as correct as mathematical precision can make it. Because if you deviate, you leave the realm of spiritual healing, and I can illustrate that for you in very few minutes. Our basic principle is that there is only one power. Now, of course, you have heard that in every religious teaching on the face of the globe, that there is only one power. Even in the Old Testament, it says God is almighty. But then it also has a devil and Satan. Even in the New Testament, where Jesus has definitely said there is no power but God, you also have a devil and Satan. In other words, while we in our religious way sing hymns to Almighty God, we also give power to climate, to weather, to germs, to infection, to contagion, to heredity, to all of the things that have caused men's ills. There's nothing consistent about that, but then there's nothing consistent about religious beliefs. But if you are going to engage in spiritual healing, you will find that you will have no success if you deviate from the absolute principle that God is all. God is the only power. Now, it is true that as you start to live this life and practice it, that you will find yourself up against the experience or belief of other powers. That's why we are in this teaching, because we are continually facing other powers, and we are learning a way of meeting those other powers, powers such as infection or contagion or heredity or age or a lack of substance or an oversubstance or a lack of activity or an overactivity. We are meeting with these in daily experience, and therefore to meet them we have to have an absolute principle. Now, when a problem comes to you, and it comes under the guise of infection or contagion or epidemic, or it comes under the guise of hereditary disease, infectious disease, contagious disease, you must instantly retire within yourself and realize, yes, that is the appearance that's facing me. But truth reveals that God is the only power, the only cause, the only law. Therefore I need not fear what mortal man or mortal mind or mortal condition can do to me. There is no power in effect. All power is in cause, and cause is always the invisible Spirit God. Now, when you face a problem with that absolute truth, that's the letter of truth, when you make these declarations to yourself in the silence, yes, I know that I'm being faced with what appears to be a condition of disease. I know that it has a law of infection, a law of contagion. I know that it has a law of heredity behind it, but I also know truth. And the truth is that only Spirit is power. Only Spirit is cause. Only Spirit is law. Therefore I need not fear these other powers, these other causes, these other laws, for they are not. Only one is, and that one is God. Now, when you have known that truth, and then you are still, you wait a minute or two, and then you get up and go about your business, you will find that through practicing this way, that sooner or later, when you settle back into your peace, an answering response will come to you. It may be as a deep breath, or it may be as a release, or it may even be as the voice of God speaking to you. But there will come an answer. Now, the reason I say that knowing this does not qualify you to be a practitioner or teacher is that you may be knowing it only up here with the mind. That is intellectually. And that really isn't power and does nothing. That only settles you within yourself until you develop a consciousness. Then when you develop a consciousness of this, that is when the healings take place. Now, when that takes place and you find that your knowing of the truth begins to result in healings for yourself or others, then you can say, aha, now my knowledge of truth is becoming a consciousness of truth. Now I'm developing the Spirit of truth. And your progress on the spiritual path has begun. Now, as you continue meeting as many problems for yourself as you can, or meeting the problems of others who come to you. And you keep practicing this, using the truths that you will find in all of my writings, all of my recordings, and certainly summed up here in this Manchester class. You will find that you are developing, we might call it a new vocabulary. Actually, it's more than that. You are developing a knowledge of the specific principles which constitute the message of the infinite way. Now, when someone comes to you for help, you can, in addition to giving them a treatment, you can give them a specific truth to carry away with them. In one case, you will probably say, look, I'm going to help you with this, but meantime, relax, because you must remember that whatever its name or nature, it isn't power, for God alone is power. To someone else who comes along, you may say, yes, I'm going to help you, but you must relax and be quiet and have the assurance, because the only law that's operating in you is the law of God. This other thing isn't law. It isn't power. Someone else will come along with a different problem, and you will be reminded of some other truth that are in the tapes or in the writings. And so you will learn gradually, when giving a treatment, also to give a specific truth for your patient or your friend to carry with them in their consciousness. Now, as you persist in that, the day will come when someone will come to you for help, and you'll find that you can talk for 10 or 15 minutes to them, expounding principles which you have learned from the tapes or from the writings. You'll find that you can speak 15 or 20 minutes, always bringing to their awareness specific principles that constitute the message of the infinite way. Now, as you continue in that way for a while, gradually you'll find you can talk for a half hour, and for 3/4 of an hour, and always with signs following. And then ultimately, the day will come when you'll realize, well, I could talk this way for an hour or two. And then you'll know by that time, if healings are coming along with your talking, that you're ready to be a practitioner or a teacher. I have explained this to students before, that when I started healing work, I had the consciousness that healed, but I didn't know how to teach. And so it was that as patients came to me, I would just explain, give them some particular principle, one truth that I knew, and later maybe 2 or 3. And the first thing you know, I found that when patients came to my office, that I could speak to them for 20 or 30 minutes on truth. And then one day, I had been in the practice about 4 years. A young woman came to my office who was a school teacher, and she said that she had seen 2 wonderful healings that had taken place in my office, one of her mother, and she'd like to know more about it, how it's done, what this truth is. And could she come to me once a week and study? I said, yes. Well, she came 2 or 3 times, and then it dawned on me, I'm not being fair. This is a school teacher. She really knows what it means to teach and be taught. And what am I doing? When she comes, I speak about something, and probably it had no connection with what I spoke of last time. And that's not really teaching. I'm not really teaching. I'm just, well, you might call it spouting, that's all. A little thing here or another subject here. That's not a teaching, because there's no continuity to it. There's no cause and effect. There's no beginning and end. There's no premise and conclusion. Now really, how should you teach a teacher? How would you teach a subject like this? And I pondered it, and then I had my pencil and I wrote down what came to me, and that was 7 Bible passages. One after another they came to me, and I wrote them down, and I said, aha, that's the way you teach. Those are the 7 Bible passages that really constitute a principle. The next day when I came to my office and I looked at that list, I thought, well, yes, that's very good, but what kind of a teaching is that to give a person 7 Bible passages and tell them that's a principle? No, I haven't gone far enough. And so as I read each one of those Bible passages, the meaning of them began to unfold, and I wrote them down. And then when that school teacher came back again, I gave her 7 different lessons with 7 different Bible passages and principles. It took 7 weeks, and when I was through, I had that pamphlet, The 7 Steps. That's the first teaching I ever did, and I was 4 years in the healing work before I did that. Do you see now what I mean by the fact that these principles have to live in you first, and you assimilate them, and then they begin to come out, and even then they come out in a disconnected way, and then by training, all of a sudden they start to come out in a connected way. And that really was the first teaching that I ever did, that booklet, The 7 Steps. Well, later, when a practitioner wanted to be a teacher, I started to work with him along that line, and then came the other half of that same booklet, The Real Teacher. And so we have in one booklet The Real Teacher and the 7 Steps. And those were the first 2 teachings that I ever undertook. Now, you can see by the others how each booklet really became a teaching of just one facet. There's the booklet, Art of Meditation and Prayer, and another one, Metaphysical Healing, and the other one, The Secret of the 23rd Psalm, and the other one, Love and Gratitude. Each one taking up only 1 or 2 points and making it so clear that whoever is listening to me can understand it. Take last night's lesson on the nature of God and the nature of prayer. Do you see how in a full hour I touched on nothing but those 2 subjects, God and prayer, but elaborated on them in such a way as to bring out what God is, and then how prayer automatically follows. Now, do you see why I say that even if you knew all these words, it wouldn't make you a teacher? Until they're assimilated in you and learn to come out of you, first brokenly, first a little bit here and a little bit there, and then connectedly, and then covering a subject. Then is when you are a teacher. Now, because I'm evidently mentally retarded in some way, it took me 16 years before I could start to be a teacher. But you will not have to wait that long. But definitely, you will have to wait, first of all, until you have enough of the principles that are in the writings and the recordings so that you know them and that they assimilate in you. Secondly, until you can prove them by healing. Always remember that in this work of the infinite way, there is no value in what anyone says unless they can back it up by some healing work, comforting work, uplifting. If they haven't a developed consciousness for that, their work is of no value. If it wasn't for that, we would have teachers all over the world. But you see, the infinite way is only 12 years old. And for that reason, the oldest students we have are 12 years old, and we only have about 4 who feel that they've developed enough in 12 years to be teachers. Do you follow that? It is not because it is difficult to learn the principles. It is only because Learning the principles is only a step toward developing the consciousness. And it's the consciousness that counts. Do you see that? That's what counts. When you hear me speak, it isn't what I'm saying to you that produces the benefit in you or the uplift. It is the year's consciousness behind it. You see? That makes the difference. Now, it is for this reason that all over the world, when students come to me and say, I would like to teach, the first question I ask is, how well do you heal? And if they can't say, oh, I'm a good healer, I'll take any case that comes along, then I say, then you're not ready to teach. If you like, you can start using the tape recorders and conduct tape recording meetings. And then as you live and move and have your being in these books and recordings, and people start to ask for help and you can give it, now you can consider that you're a practitioner. When the day comes that you can pour it back to them out of your own mouth, the way it comes out of the recording, then you're ready to be a teacher. Do you see that? Because actually, teaching is healing, and healing is teaching. They go absolutely together. But in our work, just to talk this thing, and then not be able to back it up in any way, is of no value at all. So I ask our students, bury yourselves in these books and recordings. Study them, know them. More especially in the books, the letters. 54, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Study every one of those, because there are principles that I give you each month in the letters, and you can go back over the years. The principles never change. And in each one of those books there are these letters on protective work. And always remember this, that the harmony in your daily living is proportionate to your understanding of protective work. Not only to your understanding, but to your practice of it. If you are not spending some time every single day realizing, consciously realizing, there's only one power. There's no power in effect. The Spirit of God in me is the only power. The I within me is the only power. This I within me is my rock, my fortress, my security, my peace, my health, the very health of my countenance. Then you see, you're letting the law of humanity operate on you. But when you learn to do this protective work, you are becoming a law unto yourself. And then there's no law of infection or contagion, and there's no law of heredity, no law of accident that can operate on you. Do you see that? You separate yourself from the law, the human law, in proportion as you consciously realize, I in the midst of me is mighty. This I is the bread, the wine, the water. This I within me is the meat of my life. It is the fortress. It is the health of my countenance. Nothing shall in any wise enter my experience that defileth or maketh a lie, for I am the law unto this world. The world is not a law unto me. Do you see that? But who can do that but you? I can put it in a book. I can put it on tape, but only you can live it. And in proportion as you live it, in proportion as you consciously keep the Word in you and you live in the Word, in that degree do you become entirely separate from this world. That is why the ordinary laws of supply do not operate in your experience. You may say, oh, I have no way of income. I just can have my husband's income, and that's all I've got. And someone else says, oh, I can only have what I earn. I have no other avenue of supply except what I earn. That's all that's open to me. That's true in the human scene. That's true in the human scene. Don't believe it for a minute in the spiritual scene. In the spiritual scene, you're told that you are a child of God, and if a child of God, then an heir, and if an heir, joint heir to all the heavenly riches. In the spiritual scene, you hear God saying to you, "Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine." And as you live in this, one of these days you'll find how income will start to break through to you from sources that you never dreamed of. Because God certainly is not limited to what you earn or what your husband earns. God is not limited to what your parents left you. God has no limitation. But the question is, are you looking to God, or are you looking to the husband or the wife or the parent or the child or the Social Security? Or do you see that? It all depends. Where is your vision? Now, as a human being, I certainly agree that we are all limited. Do you see that? We're all limited. If I wanted to accept appearances, I could say, I'm limited to what you give me. Well, then, if that were true, I just couldn't travel back to Hawaii, could I? No. So what do I have to do? I have to say, you owe me nothing. God is my Father. God must care for me. God has given me infinity. God is my supply. God is my life. God is my movement. Do you see that? And I keep my vision off of you, and I keep it on God. And then what may come from you is that much. What comes in the mail may be that much, and what happens some other way that we know not of happens that way. And before we're all through and the year is around, everything is taken care of. You see? But then if you say, now sit down and show me all the human ways that it came, some of you won't believe. You just won't believe, because there was no human way of accounting for it. Just no human way of accounting for it. And the whole miracle of the infinite way is all of the things that have happened that there's no human way of accounting for. Let me tell you that when we started our work in the States, I no more dreamed of Europe than of Venus or Mars. And the reason was, not that Europe wasn't in my mind, because I have traveled here in my business days, but the reason was that the war was on. And except for battleships going back and forth, there was no commerce on the high seas. And when the war was over, whoever dreamed of Europe buying American books and paying American prices for them, or whoever dreamed that America would be interested in those things? And so our thought just never turned to Europe at all. Well, a few of my friends had friends in Europe and sent a few books over, and one of these was a New Thought teacher. And she liked the Infinite Way so much that she sent a copy of it to Mr. Hamblin. And he liked it so much that he wrote an article called The Infinite Way. And in it, he said that this is a teaching we've waited 2,000 years for. He said, this is the original teaching of the Christ brought back to earth again. This is the long-awaited message. Well, you see what happened? Such a demand sprung up for the book that we began to send copies over as gifts, because England couldn't send money out, and they couldn't buy any, so we sent them over as gifts. Then as they got the Infinite Way and saw that there were other books, students would write and say, can't we have some of those other books? Well, we did. We sent others over as gifts. But the demand kept increasing until finally George Allen and Unwin wrote me a letter and said, could we publish a British edition of The Infinite Way because there's such a demand for it? Now, wouldn't you call that a miracle? Wouldn't you acknowledge that I had nothing to do with that I couldn't have done mental work about it, that I couldn't humanly have desired it, that I couldn't foresee that a man I never knew, a man I never heard of, never in my life heard his name or Science of Thought Review, would be so enthused that he would write such a wonderful article, and that out of that all of the rest of this would come. Now that's what I mean by, if I tried to show you how my supply has come, I couldn't make you believe it, because now just look, all of our writings being published in England, all of them producing royalties, all of them earning money for the publisher, for the jobber, for the retailer, for everybody concerned, and for me. Now that's what I mean when I say that if I try to humanly outline where your income will come from, it would be as foolish as for me to know where mine would come from. But once you begin to perceive, I do not look to a man whose breath is in his nostril for my supply. I accept it from whatever direction it comes, certainly with gratitude, but I don't look to anyone. I'm looking to the realization that God within me is my meat, my mind, my wine, my water, my resurrection, my whole life eternal, and that it's not dependent on anything external or anybody external to myself. Now, as I live with that, I develop the consciousness of it. If you went out of here and just said, oh, that settles it, my supply is unlimited, you cannot prove it. But if you live with this, day after day after day, each time some lack presents itself, realize, no, I'm not going to accept appearances. I'm going to understand that God fulfills himself in me. Then you'll find it may take a week or a month, but pretty soon a shilling will show up here and 5 here and 10 here, and all of a sudden you will know that a flow has started from other avenues than what you realize at this moment. And that's why I say that even if I tell you this, that doesn't make your demonstration, and it won't make you a teacher of it if you could memorize it. Now you have to live with it, keep your consciousness filled with it until you're demonstrating it. Then when you're demonstrating it, you can teach it. But when you teach it, it will be with signs following to those whom you teach. You'll find that their supply will increase, or their peace, or their joy, or their companionships. So it is with our whole message. Fill yourself with the principles. Practice them. Utilize them. Apply them to every circumstance of your life. Hear as much as you can with your ears. Read as much as you can with your eyes. Practice as much as you can in your meditation, and then your consciousness will be rebuilt. Your old mind with its thoughts and beliefs and theories will die, and this new consciousness will be born. Then you'll find that every word you utter will be with signs following. Then you'll find that the words of truth you speak are power, because behind it will be the consciousness of truth. Now, as you know, we do not put stock in numbers. If I wanted numbers for the infinite way, I would stay in London and New York and California and not travel the rest of the world, because between New York and London and Chicago and California, we've got about 40 or 50 million people. So you see, I could get all the numbers in just 4 cities. But it isn't numbers that we're seeking. What we're seeking is 1 person, 2 persons, 6, 12, who feel a response to this message, who feel that it's for them, who want to take it into their hearts and souls and minds, live it to the best of their ability, practice it, give themselves to it. That's what we're looking for. Because when we have a few such, the numbers evolve. Do you see? If we can have in this city Mr. and Mrs. Spencer to start the ball rolling, In the end, we can have a room full such as you saw here last night. But if I don't have two like that to begin with, then I don't have the rest, do I? Do you see that? Well, that's the same way. Any one of you or any two of you in your community will be the center of another dozen, 2 dozen, 4 dozen, 6 dozen. It all depends on the degree in which you fill yourselves with it. Do you see that? And that is the foundation of the work of the infinite way. What would be the good of 1,000 people sitting here listening to me? Then they go out and then they're gone. But if I can find a 1 or a 2, and they, by their inspiration and their lives and their dedication, produce 12 more, now I've got a solid foundation. Then out of that 12, 1 or 2 develops over in this community, and 1 or 2 in this community, and the first thing you know, we have got a working staff of people who are dedicated and who are showing by their dedication what this amounts to. And then you have a beautiful experience such as we had last night. Do you see that? And because of our work here, some of my friends came here from quite a few places around. You may have seen some men here that you didn't know last night. They came because of things they've learned from many places around. And that's the way it has to be. Now, our work is built on that principle. If only one of you feel such a response to this message that you imbibe it, study it, read it, practice it with patience. You won't be a practitioner or a teacher in a week, but take it in, take it in, take it in, and then gradually start giving it back. Then I have 6 and 12 and 50 and 100 and 200, and so the word of the infinite way really goes out with power, not just with audiences to say, oh, wasn't that a nice evening, which is of no value to anyone. So it is. There isn't an individual anywhere on the globe who inwardly responds to this message who cannot be himself or herself a center around which an activity of this kind can be. There can't be too many. There can't be. There's room in London for 1,000 groups. There's room in Manchester for 100 groups. Why not? A group need only consist of 2 people, 3 people, because once it registers in them, they bring 2 or 3 more. Once it registers in them, they bring 6 more. And heaven knows, with population like you have here, 100 groups wouldn't be too many. And every one of them with a recorder. Do you see that? There's no limit to this work. None. And the reason is, there's no limit while there's 4 billion people on earth, all of whom want healing, all of whom want greater supply, all of whom want greater peace, nearly all of whom would like to know something about God. That's the way our work is carried on. That's what I wanted to tell you today. Each person can be a center out of which spreads an infinite way activity. First, they must imbibe it themselves, fill themselves with it. Then they must learn to let it flow out. And then it's done. Now, all of this is based on just what this question implies. What is your conception of the nature of God as opposed to the general idea of God as a glorified man? Well, of course, the general idea of God is that it's some kind of a super being that you can ask favors of. God, give me health. Or God, give me more supply. Or God, give me employment. Well, now, when you stop to think of it, even if there could be such a God, you wouldn't want one. Because if there is a God that can give you health and isn't giving it to you now, what's wrong with it? What's wrong with a God who could give you health but isn't? That would be a withholding God, wouldn't it? And if there is a God waiting for you to be good, that's nothing but a superhuman parent. Parents sometimes ask their children to be good before they give them something. God can't be just a superhuman being. God is something greater than anything we can conceive. And so this idea that you can pray to God and get something, or that you can tithe with God and get him to unloose 90% because you give up 10, or that by finding just the right practitioner or teacher that they can bring health to you out of a clear sky. Oh, they can bring individual healings to you because of the grace of their consciousness, not because of any appeal to God. It's because of the grace of their developed consciousness. And but they can only do it for a certain length of time. If you don't wake up and develop yourself, you'll soon find that it begins to wear off. That is one of the complaints that we hear of in the metaphysical world. Why, I used to call my practitioner and got an instantaneous healing, but now it doesn't work anymore. Certainly the Master says, I'll heal you, but go and sin no more, lest the worst thing come upon you. In other words, whatever the state of consciousness that brings you your trouble, don't think you can stay in it and avoid trouble. You have to grow out of those states of consciousness. Now, any idea then that God is something that can be prayed to for favors, whether physical, mental, moral, or financial, or that God is withholding something until you just find the right church or the right teaching or the right teacher, all of that has really nothing to do with truth. Those are superstitions that began back in the beginning of time, when men first found that they could not meet the human problems that faced them. They began to look for a super being that could help them. And so they began a search for God. They didn't find one, so they invented one. But one didn't answer their purpose, so they invented a second one, and a third one, and a fourth one. And the first thing you know, there was a God of crops, and a God of weather, and a God of love, and a God of fertility, and a God of supply, and a God that had control of the waters, the fishing. And there was another who had had charge of the hunting, and a God for anything and for everything. And you just turn to whichever God for whatever favor you wanted. Well, the day came when in India it was realized that all such concepts were erroneous, that actually there was only one God. And this teaching became prevalent in India, while they had many facets or phases of God, like we have today. God as Father, God as Mother, God as Christ, God as love, God as Spirit. So did they. But they pictured them all in different forms, and so it has been thought that Hindus are paganistic and have many gods. They don't. They only have one God. But just as we do, they will say God is love, and then they'll make a statue of love. And they'll say God is life, and then they'll have another statue showing life. And they will say that, God is Father, and so they'll have a male statue. God is Mother, and they'll have a female statue. But actually, these are just showing forth the different facets or phases of God, of the one God. Now, this teaching spread from India to Egypt. And it's quite a story there of how the king Menotep IV adopted it and insisted that it be followed in his kingdom, and he ordered all of the statues of the many gods destroyed, and only the one God could be worshipped. Well, of course, people had had a dozen gods for so long that they couldn't get used to one God. So one day they threw down his statues of the one God and threw him out too. And they put back all their other gods. But King Menetempt IV had a close, intimate friend who had learned this whole teaching of one God and who believed in it and who loved it. And when King Menetempt IV abdicated, this friend also abdicated to Ur of the Chaldees, and he then became known as Abraham. And he became the founder of the Hebrew race, the first man in our Western world, or Near East, to found a religious teaching on one God. Well, of course, the Hebrews had just as much difficulty as the Egyptians did in sticking to one God. And so while they had Abraham, they probably did stay with the one God. But pretty soon they wandered around with Baal and all the other neighboring gods. And then another Hebrew prophet would come and bring them back to the one God. And then they'd lose it again and go out worshiping these other gods. And this went on until the day of Moses. Now, you know, Moses had the revelation not only of one God, but of the nature of God. To Moses it was revealed that I am is God, the very I am of my being. Not off here in the clouds, not out here to be prayed to, here, within me. I am. This is God. And you know, that revelation was so great that it enabled him to be the leader of the Hebrew people and lead them out of slavery. Well, from then on, and up until the time of Jesus, the Hebrew people wandered in and out of that one God, back and forth to the many gods and one God and many gods. And they had the ups and downs of their faithlessness. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. Until Jesus came and reinstated not only, of course the Hebrews in their temple never deviated from the fact that there was one God, but just think of what a concept they had of God, that you could tithe your income and please God, that you could sacrifice animals and please God, that you could have doves killed and please God and get blessings for yourself. Think of that concept of God. Yes, they had one God, but what a horrible one. Do you see that? They too were going to God for favors. And how did they get those favors? By observing holidays, by sacrificing animals, by sacrificing doves, by tithing with the church. Oh, they did everything in their power to get God to do things for them. And Jesus came along and he shocked that world. He said, God has no pleasure in your sacrifices. He turned over the money changers. God has no pleasure in these sacrifices and in this money changing. He shocked them more later. He said, no more shall you worship in this holy temple in Jerusalem. You must worship in spirit and in truth. Can you imagine? That would be like a new minister coming here to England and saying, you mustn't worship in the Church of England cathedrals. Whew! Can you imagine it? They'd ride him out of town on a horseback. But that's what Jesus did with the greatest cathedral of them all, the greatest temple that was ever built up to that time, the one that the Jews were so passionately fond of that they traveled the whole length of the Holy Lands every year to worship in that temple so that their sins would be forgiven and they could bribe their God to do favors for next year. And here's this man saying, no more shall you worship there, but in spirit and in truth. Now this changes your whole concept of God, because now you've got no more God that you can go to a temple and pray to. You've got no more God that you can bribe with your tithing or with your sacrifices. or with sackcloth and ashes, or by observing Christmas holidays or Easter holidays or other holidays in the year. No more can you satisfy God with those things. Now what are you going to do? And you know what they answered? He's taken our Lord away. He's taken our Lord away. Yes, he did. He took that old false concept of God away from them. He surely did. But he gave them another God. A God who knows your need before you do. So you don't have to tell him. A God whose pleasure it is to give you the kingdom, so you don't have to ask him. And you don't have to bribe him, and you don't have to sacrifice for him, and you don't have to become an ascetic for him. You just have to be normal, love this God who lives your life by grace, and love your neighbor as yourself in the recognition that everybody on this face of the earth is the child of that same God. Now, how are you going to bring up your own children not to love each other as brothers and sisters? Can you set one of your children against the others? No. Then no more can you please God if you have set one brother over here and one over here, one nation over here and one nation over here. The only way you can please this God whom Jesus taught is when you love God. Love God, it makes no difference if it's a rainy day. God made it. It makes no difference if it's a shiny day. God made it. It makes no difference what your weather is. God made it. Learn to love it in that way, and you'll find that it doesn't react on you. It only reacts on you harmfully because you resist it and resent it and call one kind of weather bad and another kind good. When you come to see that all weather is good because it's of God, you take it as it comes and receive a blessing from each type of weather. And so it is. When you learn to accept all men and women as brothers and sisters because they're of the same God, you will receive blessings from every nation on the face of the earth. But just as sure as you shut one out, you're drawing unto yourself trouble. Trouble. It is only when you acknowledge, why, how could God have illegitimate children? Every child, man, woman, must be children of God. Now you are loving your neighbor as yourself. Do you see that? And you're loving God supremely because you're not accusing God of having a bastard child over here or a bastard nation over here, or ill will toward this one and ill will toward that one. You're loving God supremely when you see that God's grace falls on the just and the unjust, that the sunshine is available for the good and the bad. The rain is available for the good and the bad. The cattle on 1,000 hills are available for white and black and Jew and Gentile. Do you see that? Then you've got the correct understanding of God as God was revealed to us by Jesus Christ. Do you see that? Then you will know why Paul was able to say, circumcision or uncircumcision availeth nothing. Now, you probably don't realize the magnitude of that statement. Do you know that in the Hebrew teaching, a boy child that was not circumcised was something outside the pale? He was unclean. You couldn't rightfully be in the temple as a man unless you were circumcised. You were unclean. And here comes Paul saying, to be circumcised or not circumcised makes no difference. You know what the equivalent is? Go to the church and say to be baptized or not to be baptized makes no difference. Do you see that? But unless you yourself can agree that to be baptized or not to be baptized means nothing, to have a prayer said over you when you're dead or not to have it makes no difference. Do you see that? Until you can see that without ceremony, without rite, without creed, without all of these symbols, that so far as God is concerned, we're all one. Do you see that? Now, that doesn't mean that we necessarily have to do away with these things. Oh no, because symbolically they have beautiful meanings. The baptism, the communion, the confession, everything there is in the church has a most magnificent meaning behind it. So therefore, we don't have to do away with them. They're beautiful to experience. The sin is to believe that they're necessary for our salvation. Do you see what I'm trying to get at? There's nothing wrong about going to a communion service in church or a baptism or being baptized. Because if you can see the significance behind it, it's tremendous. But in and of itself, it can't make you a good Christian or a bad Christian. Neither circumcision nor uncircumcision availeth anything. Neither baptism nor not baptism availeth anything. Neither communion nor... Do you follow that? And that's why it is. When we come together, we don't have ceremonies or rites or creeds. Why? Because I haven't invented any. And so I have none to give you. But if you enjoy your particular church and you enjoy its service, go and enjoy it. This doesn't take it away from you. This only tries to impress on you that it has no power toward your salvation, for you need nothing but that which you already have, the love of God. God loves you supremely. God made you in its own image and likeness. God will maintain you and sustain you if you'll just relax from trying to get it by might or by power. If you'll just relax and let it come by the Spirit. Do you see that? Now, having said that, anything you want and anything you can enjoy in the outer realm. I am one of those who loves all forms of symbology. That is why I am interested and active in this esoteric masonry. For the simple reason that it explains all of the wonderful degrees and ceremonies behind masonry, the lessons. And I love all that. And the same way, I really love the story of baptisms and of communion and of all of these church rites, not for the ceremony's sake, but if you only knew what is in back of it, you'd see how wonderful it really can be. It's the same way I've brought this out in classes about ordination. Now, you know, if a man goes to a seminary for a certain amount of years, he's ordained as a priest. What does that mean? It means he gets a diploma and an authority to be a priest or a minister. But do you really think that that ordains him? No, because that wasn't the meaning of ordaining. The meaning of ordination Jesus gave in Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, and I am ordained. Ah, see how beautiful ordination is. See how stupid it is when it's done on a platform with a diploma. Do you see that? We have the same thing in metaphysics. I don't give any degrees. I don't give any titles. I don't give any diplomas. Why? They're meaningless. If you haven't attained the consciousness, then I'm fooling you by giving you a degree. But if you have attained the consciousness, you don't need the degree. Do you see that? Once God ordains you, you don't need any diplomas from me. Who could stop you from healing? See that? Even the law couldn't stop you from healing if you are once ordained of God. Follow that? But the law cannot ordain you. And if it gave you a dozen diplomas, could you go out and heal with them? No. And that's the meaning of symbology. That is why communion means the ability to commune with God. Now, when we meditate together, we are in communion. But we don't call it a communion service, but it is communion. We are in communion with God and with each other.